Just for the people that don't know, API stands for Application Programming Interface, and it's just basically a way for systems to talk to each other. So as you can see up top there, we're working with the public Kroger API, and basically very simply, this allows a user through their authorization, which is through something called OAuth 2 protocol, which is basically a nice clean way that I'm sure all of you have used when you've authed something with Google, with Twitter, with Facebook. That's what the OAuth protocol is. And so Kroger has that exact same thing. So we know what the flow is, and then we can access all of these APIs to do various actions within their system on behalf of the user through our system. And so, so we'll show you kind of our demo here, and then you can see kind of how these APIs operate in action.
So I'm going to refresh real quick. I'm actually logged into my user. This is our Spaceheater demo environment. And I'm going to refresh, and you're going to see really quickly this Kroger symbol just flashed, and it reauthenticated my user directly with Kroger through their API. And that's kind of what Ben's talking about. And so now we have this.
That's the OAuth standard. And basically it gives a access token and a refresh token that is much more longstanding. And that gets an access token to be actually let the user hit all of those rich APIs from Kroger.
Exactly. And so what we're looking at here now is as I said, our demo environment for what you might do when you're setting up a space to invoke your APIs and work with them. And this is our test environment. And so you can see we've got a couple prompt suggestions here that we've repopulated for Kroger. And we're going to go through to some of the potential and some of the things we've built so far that are working with this Kroger API. And then we're going to show you how you can set that up by going back through the process. And it's pretty quick. But just for now, I'm going to say, hey, show me all the cold pressed juice. So right now we're getting a bunch of the endpoints that we've embedded. We've embedded those in a vector database that we are able to vector encode the user prompt, show me all the cold pressed juice, and compare that against our vector embedded endpoints to let our system choose the best endpoint to get the response from Kroger. And as you can see, our LLM created the GET request, and it has decided that the query string should have, the common terms cold pressed juice. And it's brought us in 7 items, which is something that we set in the space as the limit we want for these kinds of prompts.
Let me just jump in real quick, Alex. So that LLM basically is, we feed it the endpoints that, as you can see up in the top right box there, just the things you can do within Kroger's system. And then the AI actually decides which is the best one of those to accomplish what the user is asking. And then it actually forms on the fly that URL that we're hitting on our backend server to get that information to actually populate this user interface here.
This is something that we were doing in our last demo was, it's called a GET request. It's just pulling in some data. You're not really invoking an action with the API. The big difference there is when you do a GET request, you have something called a query string right here. When you do a action, like I want to now add some juice to my cart or something like that, you're doing a put or a post, and those require a request body. And so it's a different way of creating a API endpoint invocation. And we need to train the model how to do those certain things. And so that's what we've kind of evolved our system from last time to this time. And now I'm going to show you guys just through natural language. Let's pick some juice out here. And then we're going to talk about why that's interesting or important, because a lot of these things, as you can see, are things that you could do in a normal non-AI environment. But there's definitely going to be some really cool things we can do leveraging AI to help capture user intent down the road. So I'm just going to say, add the citrus greens to my cart for delivery. Okay. So what we should see is it's picking some new endpoints, and the LLM has now generated what I mentioned is a put request, and it's got the request body here. It's decided that is the UPC for the juice, and hopefully that's the right one. I'm probably going to go check that right now. Let's update my shopping cart on Kroger's website and see. And here we go. It looks like I must have left one in my cart from before, but there is the citrus greens that I just added. So as you can see, we were able to hit the endpoint just through the LLM. and add an item to my cart. We would love for the demo to be able to do more things like update your cart or view your cart. The Kroger API for public is great, but it only allows you to do add to carts. And so we're in the process. We're going to be applying for a partner API to be able to do more things with their API and do things like look at the cart. But another example here, and as you can see, we've got these cards, these product cards. That's all part of the space that we've defined for Kroger in this Gen AI environment. But we might have a map. So let's say, show me some locations near 45236, which is the Cincinnati area. And as you can see, we've got some different Kroger locations. And just so happens there's the Blue Ash location that was a couple blocks away from where I grew up and it looks very familiar to me. But as you can see, you can start to set up some really interesting flows and user experiences invoking these APIs. Maybe I say something more vague, like what are some lean meat options, and see what we get back now. So again, the API has created the GET request just using the terms lean meat, and we should be getting some nice options from Kroger's that I could view on the site or add to cart, those kinds of things. So what's really interesting about this? Go ahead, Ben. Were you going to say something?
Oh, no, I was just going to say, and as you can see with the product cards and location cards, you can kind of start to see as far as all the data types that could be possibly generated within inline in an LLM chat, such as charts or anything like that. And so, as you can see in that middle box there in the LLM response, you can see it's V1/products. So we can infer some details like, oh, this is probably going to return a product or something like that, and be able for a space to be able to generate some of this UI to create the space that they want and the experience that they want for their customers. So it could be very different from Kroger to a different company as they define what their user interface looks like, the possible cards that could go in there and all that stuff.
Yeah, and one thing, back to what you said at the beginning, Jordan, about having this tree with all this fruit in it, and you want to be able to access all of it and get all the good data out of your API. One of the things that I think is going to be really, really interesting is when we start to, going back to what we're talking about at the beginning with S Group and the personal data pods. Now imagine I've got some dietary restrictions, or I'm trying to, have a lower calorie intake or eat more protein or whatever it might be. I can start to save those attributes to my own user within Spaceheater and have those pulled in via our RAG embedding. So when I do a prompt that says, hey, show me some meat options or show me some dinner options, the LLM can take those concepts into consideration when it forms these query strings. So I might get some very interesting results that I hadn't thought to look for. And you can really go down the rabbit hole. If you imagine a brand like Kroger could have influencer chefs with recipes that are only available to this space. So when I say, hey, I want to make something interesting for a dinner party, we could pull in a recipe relevant to things that I like and automatically query all the right products and allow me to bring that into my cart or reference my previous shopping history along with those kinds of things. The possibilities are really endless, and we can do that by creating these environments, creating the available data that's available to the RAG system, and adjusting the prompts. And so now we're going to show you a little bit more about that on the next screen here. This is actually looking at our Kroger environment, that demo that you just saw. And so you can see we've got, just our space name. This is all pretty simple right now, but we're going to be adding a lot of really interesting features to be able to customize the space and invoke APIs in a really powerful way. Here we have our prompt editor, so we can choose different steps of the LLMs that are analyzing the endpoints, analyzing the user message, or analyzing the response from the API to give the user a response. And so we're able to select those different steps here, create new prompts to test if we want to test them, get some different optionality there in what, how it renders to the user. So I'm going to show you guys real quick. I'm going to go back. We're going to start with a fresh space right here and kind of go through that process. So I'm just going to call this demo 2. I think that's probably an unused name. I don't know. I've been testing a lot of things here. So we're going to create a new space. And as you can see, we have 0 endpoints right here from our API. And we've just cloned some basic prompts from our default prompt library. And those are here. But before we can do anything, we need to ingest some endpoints. So I'm going to choose some files here. These are those exact same Kroger JSON API endpoint files. So I'm going to start bringing these in, and you'll see we're ingesting these endpoints. And we're going to choose another one here and open and upload. And we're just going to keep feeding these into here until we have all our endpoints listed right here. And we'll show you what we can do with it. We got our location.
So yeah, there are Kroger has 15 endpoints for their public API, and then there's actually a lot more in their partner API. And different companies have different APIs for different things. Like Shopify, for instance, has hundreds of different API endpoints. So you can start to see as far as what the power of dealing with products or dealing with discounts or dealing with lots of stuff you can see and be able to manage. And Alex, if you want to click into one of those endpoints, maybe you can see kind of the details
absolutely.
about what's going on with anything.
So yeah, here's a lot of the information that we feed into our first analysis step. So we have a description of what the endpoint provides. So this is about getting products back. It tells you some of the parameters and how to create the request. And then our LLM is going to look at that and say, okay, we know what the user's talking about. They said they want something, rich and decadent for dessert, and we're going to help them find some things that relate to those terms. Or, hey, they have a gluten intolerance. So when they are looking at cereal, we're going to make sure that we don't pull in cereals that have gluten in them. And the more robust the API endpoint and the parameters that it can take, the more interesting things that we can start to do with these GenAI experiences. Coming soon, I won't get into it too much, but coming soon, we can pass in prompts directly to these endpoints and have them injected into the prompt context window so that we can actually tune our models, how they behave and how they react to these APIs and other RAG data directly from the data that's being leveraged at that moment. And so it's going to allow you to be really concise with what you're telling the model to do and not have a bunch of extraneous instructions that confuse it and really give it the right instructions. And so we've just ingested these endpoints. We've got our basic prompts here. So now I'm going to go back to our space that we showed you in the beginning. And this is the new space, the new demo. We just so happen to have it hard coded for OAuth for Kroger's because, for the sake of the demo, but this could go to any API and any OAuth and any endpoint.
So that's the beauty of the OAuth protocol and the Open API protocol, in that they're all the same as far as how they're defined and used. So it's really easy to now spin up whatever system that has the OAuth and then also the Open API spec. And then it's going to be pretty much plug and play at that point.
Yeah. And so, as I mentioned, we want these spaces to be unique to the user experience. And a big part of calling and invoking an API is anticipating what is going to come back with that data and how do we want to render it for the user to have an interesting experience. And so I've just got these default prompts in here now for this new space we created, and we're going to go back through the same thing and look at some cold pressed juice options. And as you can see, we're getting a bunch of data back from the API, but we're not getting our product cards or anything. We're just getting some formatted markdown. We can see the brands, the size, the description, a lot of the same stuff we saw, but it's not really looking the way we want it to for the UX. And so if I go back to manage here, we've got our demo environment that we just set up, and I can go to my streaming analysis step, and I'm going to scroll down here a little bit. We've got a little active button here so that you can decide if you want to save some different prompts and play around with how that, what the results are. And I want to stress, this is for us to build out experiences right now. This isn't something we put user facing right now. We hope to have a much smoother, maybe AI guided experience in setting up spaces one day, but this allows us to create really interesting UX and spaces invoking APIs on the fly and test our system. So I'm going to go back now to our old Kroger environment, and I'm going to steal the prompt from the streaming analysis right here. It seems to be that streaming 3, this prompt that I've saved, is working the best. And you can see there's quite a bit in here. And as I mentioned before, bringing some of these prompt snippets into the actual endpoints rather than having it in a big prompt like this is going to help us be even more controlled and exact in the instructions we're feeding the LLM. But for now, I'm going to copy this right here. and I'm going to drop it into my prompt here. This is the original default prompt that we brought into our demo 2 environment. I'm going to just save that right now. So now, if I go back to our demo again, and I call the same initial suggestion prompt, we should be seeing some product cards because we now instructed the LLM to anticipate these API results. Uh-oh, did I not save it? Let's see what we did. Here's the demo here. Let's see.
And we found when you overwhelm the LLM with a long prompt, as we currently have, it is error prone. And so that's what Alex was talking about as far as dropping little snippets of that into the actual vector
Oh,
embeddings of it. So depending on what it's actually doing, it's much more relevant for the LLM, and it will actually get more meaningful and less hallucinations with the results by having just very targeted data versus having kind of a bigger prompt. And that kind of also leads to right now we're using kind of larger models, such as the 70 billion parameter models, but eventually we are starting to train much more smaller models that are much faster and to do much more limited tasks, such as concatenating URL strings and stuff like that. So it'll be much faster and much more targeted results with what it's doing.
yeah, exactly. So we are building in public, and we actually pushed some code about 5 minutes before this LinkedIn Live, and so it looks like we've interrupted our flow of saving those prompts. But I assure you, it does work. And so back to our original Kroger demo where the prompt is correct, we can kind of look at we basically experience these same results. So show me some healthy bread options. So again, this should be providing us some product cards and a similar experience to what we saw initially. And so it looks like that might be the only healthy bread option we've got coming in currently from the API. But that's okay.
So that just actually highlights one of the limitations with, so you can see in the middle box there, the filter term was healthy and bread. And so, depending how the semantic search is working on Kroger's side, you could get results like this. So one thing we've been thinking about is kind of what the next paradigm of search is, where maybe there are different ways that we can get more meaningful results from search rather than just like, okay, healthy bread could mean a lot of things to a lot of different people, including the search. And so we're thinking about that as far as ways that the best meaningful results we can get from these.
Absolutely. As far as personalization and where we can take things with spaces and invoking APIs, Jordan, you mentioned at the beginning being able to bring in data and access interesting data. Imagine being able to set this up where you have more than one endpoint called at the same time, and then you have an LLM analysis step where it can take into context, what is the user asking? Maybe you prompt it to have a little bit more freedom in the types of answers it gives the user by combining and ingesting interesting data. And for me, I think with GenAI, it's really about uh, leveraging the hallucinations and the ability to come up with things that you wouldn't have thought of. But then it's really important for us to create some logic to rein it all back in and have it be something that's meaningful within the experience that you propose.
There needs to be robust handling on the back end to ensure that everything is correct. Like, for instance, they talked to lawyers about using LLMs for case research and stuff, and they were like, "Oh, with law, you definitely don't want any hallucinations, very black and white." And they actually said, "You know what? Initially, we do want some hallucinations and some creativity in there to come up with stuff." And then on the back end of that, obviously, they need to make sure that the cases that the LLM is coming up with are in fact real. But that creates just this, you know, very serendipitous kind of things that we might not have put together ourselves. And we have the power of this great technology that can do some things and make some connections that we aren't capable of.
Absolutely. And one of the things I really want to mention before maybe we can take some questions if we have time, but one of the things I want to mention that I think is really important about an organization to be able to stand up these APIs in these spaces is just that if you were to let your API be accessible to everybody out there, we we're talking earlier about how you don't really have control of how your data is going to be represented to a consumer. And if you're spending a lot of thought and energy around crafting this perfect user experience or building a relationship with your customer or any kind of information presented in a certain way, you want to be able to control how that's being messaged and how that's coming out. So having OAuth and or API keys and being able to kind of constrain who has access to a bit of data in a space really gives you the ability to make sure that you're having that data represented in the way you want and retaining the relationships with the people that are using the API by providing them this extra level of value that they can't get outside of your data environment. And I think that's going to be really interesting as we go on and go forward and invoke different APIs and create the tools for people to be able to do this and come up with whatever experience they want.
Yeah, I think you guys have explained it really well. And we are out of time. So I don't think we're going to be able to take questions today. But of course, if anyone does have a question, please feel free to leave it in the chat and Alex or Ben will
Yeah,
get back to you. But
Absolutely.
yeah, it's interesting how, you're talking about giving brands the ability to really take all of this information that they have and make their customers' lives easier. Just giving them a different way to do it and
absolutely.
finding all of this information that maybe wasn't as easily accessible. Uh, so can't wait to see the next iteration. I love seeing your demos. So let's end the day with a little bit of music. Thank you for
Awesome.
joining us today.
Yeah, thank you so
Thank you.
And
much.